Welcome back to Conozca Sus Derechos, Know Your Rights. This program is brought to you by the Hispanic Bar Association of Central Florida. It is our mission to inform the community of important legal topics affecting us all. Today, we will be continuing our conversation about same-sex marriage and its ramifications. I am Camila Panchon Silva, the Community Relations Chair of the Hispanic Bar Association. Today, we will discuss the legal and practical ramifications of the overturn of the ban on same-sex marriage. Today with me, I have excellent speakers to discuss these ramifications. I have Mary Meeks, Civil Rights Attorney, and Immigration Attorney Maria Davidova. Mary, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure, and thank you for having me here today. I think it's a great program for your community.
Thank you.
I'm a civil rights attorney. I've practiced in the Central Florida area for over 25 years. And for the last 10 or 15 years, I've been very involved in advocacy for the LGBT community, specifically relating to the passage of human rights ordinances and domestic partner registries. And most recently, I was part of the legal team that filed a lawsuit in Miami, the first lawsuit filed in Florida, that challenged the Florida same-sex marriage ban and resulted in overturning that ban. And I'm also a part of the community. I've been with my wife for 16 years, and we've been married for over 4 years.
Wow, wow. Maria, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yes, so my name is Maria Davidova. I'm an immigration attorney here in Central Florida, originally an immigrant myself from Russia. And I also thank you so much to Orange TV and the Hispanic Bar Association for having this program. This overturn has made a major impact on the immigration aspect for many Central Florida residents. I'm very excited that they get to receive this new information here today.
Thank you both for being here today. Mary, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the federal level, about the forests and not the trees. What is the status when it comes to the Supreme Court involvement in this issue?
Well, the original, what I call kind of the landmark moment for marriage equality nationwide, was the U.S. Supreme Court's Windsor decision, which was back in June of 2013, where the Supreme Court overruled DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act. And that was a completely federal issue. So the court said that the federal government cannot pass a law that forbids it from recognizing valid and legal same-sex marriages performed in states that recognize them. And so that decision, number one, required the federal government to recognize all of those marriages, which then gave access to those couples to the more than 1,200 federal rights and benefits that attach to marriage. And it also laid the groundwork for all of these state-level challenges, including the one in Florida, that have been coming in across the nation for the last 6 to 8 months that have resulted in dozens of decisions overturning state same-sex marriage bans.
Okay, so why if the Supreme Court has reviewed this issue in the past, and now that same-sex marriage is legal in Florida, why is the Supreme Court agreeing to revisit this issue next summer or this summer?
Well, the issue they've agreed to address this summer is not the exact same issue as is in the Windsor case. Again, that was a completely federal issue that related to a federal law. They're very similar issues, obviously, but the precedent that the Windsor case gave us is what the court said is that a law that refuses to recognize or that treats same-sex couples differently, number one, serves absolutely no legitimate governmental interest, and number two, is clearly designed to harm same-sex couples, and that is, in the court's words, abhorrent to our Constitution. Now, they weren't applying all of those rulings specifically to state-level constitutional marriage bans, but the same principles arguably apply. So hopefully they'll reach the same conclusion, but it is not the exact same issue.
Okay. So any predictions as to what will happen this summer?
Well, I think the interesting thing is at the same time that the court made the Windsor decision overturning DOMA, they also had the Prop 8 case, which was the exact same issue from California as we have here today, but they kind of punted on it and did not give us a ruling. They threw it out on procedural grounds. They apparently weren't ready to address it. I think what's different now, not that much later, is that the total landscape has changed in America and even in Florida. You now have same-sex marriage is now legal in 37 states, covering over 70% of the population, and polls nationwide and in Florida now consistently show that a majority and even 60% of the country now favors legalization of same-sex marriage. So I think, number one, they're ready, the landscape has changed, and you do have some conflicting decisions, and we need national uniformity on this issue.
So This, as you mentioned, this is a federal case, the Supreme Court decision in the Windsor case. So, Maria, as we all know, immigration is federal law. So what's the significance of that decision at the federal level for this community, the gay community, but who are also immigrants or who have immigrant spouses or relatives?
Well, that particular decision has made just an absolutely huge impact on this specific community. So despite marriage having been legal in certain states, because immigration benefits are purely federal, the DOMA decision prevented any of those legally married couples from applying for any immigration benefits. They were routinely denied on the basis that the federal government wasn't essentially recognizing those marriages. So once that was overturned, USCIS, which is United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, very promptly put out press releases basically stating that now all of those applicants that are eligible for those benefits are welcome to apply, and they have certainly made a lot of strides in being able to grant those benefits to those particular immigrants or immigrant spouses that have been denied that for such a long time.
Okay, and when you mention benefits, what benefits are we talking about?
So the most typical one is the spousal petition, which is where the U.S. citizen spouse is now able to petition for their now legal spouse. Particularly because it's a federal issue, USCIS said early on, right after DOMA was overturned, that even if the spouses reside in a state where marriage wasn't recognized, such as Florida until very recently, as long as they got married legally in a state that did recognize gay marriage, they were eligible to apply in whichever state they were residing. So they have definitely provided the ability to obtain a green card in certain circumstances. They've also allowed, for example, couples that are together but not yet married but are planning on doing so to apply for a fiancé visa for the immigrant that happens to be abroad to be able to come here and then get married here and obtain a green card.
Okay. So are there additional benefits now that these couples are allowed to marry in Florida?
I think it may make things simpler as far as jurisdiction-wise. There's no specific additional immigration benefits that they've obtained because fortunately for us, immigration took a very generous view early on in stating that as long as they were married in any state where it was legal, they could go ahead and apply. So on our side of the law, we have not had to wait until this recent decision to be able to utilize those benefits.
Okay, and going back to you, Mary, that brings a point, a very important point. So what will happen to couples who were able to get married after January 6th? And let's just say that in the summer, we hope that that's not what's going to happen, but let's just say in the summer the Supreme Court decides to rule against same-sex marriage. What will happen then to these couples?
Well, that's a very big question. Obviously, hopefully, we hope that doesn't occur. But there's actually two questions that come up if the court rules against marriage equality in June. And one is those couples that are now getting married from January through June, what will happen to those marriages? We believe that those marriages will probably stay intact and continue to be recognized, even though going forward, couples won't be able to get married in Florida. The second question is whether folks like my wife and I who have got married in other states, and at the moment, as we sit here today, our marriage is recognized. If the court rules the other way, will that continue to be the case? And I think that's a much harder question, and it is entirely possible that those marriages, out-of-state marriages, will not only no longer prospectively be recognized, but will not be considered not having been recognized at all.
So Maria, you as an attorney, let's say that you have a couple who just got married or who are thinking about getting married, but they're hesitant when it comes to going forward because they don't know what's going to happen at the federal level. They want to go forward with the immigration petition. What would be your advice to them? Should they go forward with the marriage? Should they go to another state? Or you don't think there's going to be any repercussions when it comes to their immigration case if the Supreme Court were to overturn or go against same-sex marriage?
I think that the one benefit of dealing with the federal level is that even if the Supreme Court now, which of course we hope doesn't happen, goes against sort of determinations at the state level, the previous decision stands. So if the marriage was executed in the state where it was legal, at the time that it was executed, it's a legal marriage throughout the United States for immigration purposes. Having said that, if I feel that there's a sufficient risk that 6 months from now, same-sex marriages aren't going to be recognized in Florida, then yes, I probably would advise my clients, just like similar to Mary, to perhaps go to another state where it's a more established standard and get married there, so that I don't have to, have the issue of trying to show whether it's still a legal marriage in the state where they got married.
Okay.
A year from now.
Can I add another thing that some
Sure.
folks are contemplating and actually doing, given that I hopefully very small possibility that that might happen in June, is the folks who have the out-of-state marriages, some of them are actually remarrying here in Florida, so that if that worst-case scenario occurs, they'll be within that window of marriages that will still continue to be recognized. So some people are getting remarried in Florida.
And that's not an issue? You can remarry in Florida even though you have been married?
Yeah, there's absolutely no prohibition.
Okay.
I actually, even outside of this issue, have been aware of couples who actually go around the country wanting to get married in every state in the country. There is some confusion, I think, among some clerks that aren't sure what to do with that, but there is no reason that folks cannot remarry in as many states as they want.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
That's a lot of expensive marriages.
It is a big expense. Well, thank you so much for being here today. We have to take a little break, but we will continue discussing this topic. We're going to continue going into the ramifications on same-sex marriage at the federal level. Welcome back to Conozca sus Derechos, Know Your Rights, a program brought to you by the Hispanic Bar Association of Central Florida. I am Camila Panchon Silva, Community Relations Chair of this organization. Today we're talking about the federal implications of same-sex marriage. We have with us attorney Mary Meeks and Maria Davidova. Now that Mary has given us a great overview about the status of the law, I want to talk about the actual implementation of this change. Have we faced any issues when it comes to same-sex marriage?
Unfortunately, as of January 6th, same-sex couples could get married in Florida, but we have become aware of a number of issues, whether they're glitches or they've been intentional issues. One specifically is we know the Social Security Administration, at least for a while, was refusing to issue new Social Security cards with folks' married name on it. We think that's been resolved. We had some reports that hospitals were refusing to issue birth certificates with both spouses' names on it. There certainly are still some issues going on with clerks around the state.
I heard that some clerks were asking for an individual exception to execute these marriages. Is that legal?
I don't believe that is legal, and if that is occurring and we hear of instances of that, there will be lawyers that will address that issue.
So what would you suggest to a couple who goes up to the court and they face issues, they face some barriers? What should they do? Is there somebody they can call? Is there a website they can visit?
Yes, I think both Equality Florida, which is the statewide LGBT advocacy organization, and the ACLU, both of whom have been involved in all of these lawsuits. They have a whole cadre of lawyers that have volunteered to kind of be on standby to address those issues. So anybody having a problem, yes, we want them to report it. You can go to the website, Equality Florida or ACLU, and they will have lawyers that they can refer folks to help address those issues.
Okay. So Maria, as an attorney, as an immigration attorney, have you experienced any issues that an immigrant couple or a person who's an immigrant who's part of this community has had to face? There is an additional barrier. They're immigrants, and on top of that, they also had to face the barriers of being in this community. Have you had that experience?
I mean, we've had a lot of those experiences, obviously, prior to the overturning of DOMA, where they couldn't get any access to immigration benefits despite being legally married, perhaps in a different state, and besides, and that marriage being recognized. Now that that's been overturned, more of the more recent challenges that we're seeing is that not all USAS officers obviously have been trained in addressing the issues specific to same-sex couples when they're performing those immigration interviews to determine the validity of those marriages. So thankfully, our local Orlando USCIS office conducts regular liaison meetings with immigration attorneys. They just did one on Wednesday, in fact. And they've made it very clear that they have received a lot of training, both on the legal application of it, but as well as additional sensitivity training to determine which questions are appropriate in determining whether the marriage is valid and which ones are not. And they are continuing to receive sensitivity training to assure that whatever personal convictions or biases a USCIS officer has do not affect that particular couple or their access to immigration benefits.
So how about legal protections for this community, Mary? Is there anything in the law that protects this community against discrimination?
Unfortunately, even though hopefully we now will have marriage equality in Florida, thanks to the courts, literally in the state of Florida, statewide level, there are absolutely no legal protections, rights, or benefits whatsoever for LGBT folks and their families. It is still perfectly legal in the state of Florida to fire somebody because they're gay or transgender. It is still perfectly legal in the state of Florida to refuse service at a hotel or a restaurant to somebody because they're gay or transgender. So we still need to deal with the very basic issue of discrimination. It's actually quite ironic at the moment, and this is true in several other states as well, that folks can now get married, but perhaps public awareness of their marriage can lead to them being fired by an employer who does not approve of that.
Right, that's a shame. A lot of work to be done still.
There's still a lot of work to be done. I mean, the fact that marriage equality may, in some people's views, be forced on them by the courts will not change their attitudes and benefits, and prejudices. And those things will still continue to happen. And I think we're actually, as in many other states, going to see somewhat of a backlash from the people who are upset about the fact that we may have marriage equality here.
Like what do you mean a backlash? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, currently there's a bill pending in the Florida legislature to literally undo some of the local level discrimination protections that would literally take away protections that have been granted at maybe a city or a county level.
Like what? What type of protections?
Recently there have been a lot of municipalities that have granted employment protections to transgender individuals, and there's literally a bill before the Florida legislature to undo it and to say going forward that local municipalities cannot grant any protections to transgender individuals in certain specific ways. There's also what you may have heard of as the kind of religious liberty argument, that even if a state like Florida may consider granting discrimination protections, they're going to insert some great big huge exception to that says anybody that has a religious objection is allowed to discriminate.
Oh, that's a shame. Well, now at the federal level, Maria, is there any type of protection, particularly when it comes to the immigrant community? Although, like I mentioned to Mary, there's still a lot of work to be done. The United States is fairly protective when it comes to the gay community. That's not the case when we see to other countries, specifically South America, Latin America. Are there any protections that the United States as a government gives to LGBT people who are being discriminated against in other countries?
There certainly are, and I am happy to say that both the Immigration Service and the Immigration and Federal Courts in the past 20 years have just taken great strides in extending particularly asylum protections for those individuals that experience persecution on the basis of their sexual identity, orientation, or gender issues abroad. So we have definitely seen both the Immigration Service and the Immigration Court come out with additional guidance in the last 2 years to once again to make both the interviewing officers and the courts aware of the particulars of those issues that these individuals might be experiencing as far as the type of persecution. And they've also made it very clear that your sexual preference is intrinsically linked to your identity. So it's not one of those things that, back when we looked 25 years ago, immigration tried to argue that you can choose not to act out on your sexual preferences, and therefore you couldn't show that you were getting persecuted. And they've now definitely established that that's just an inherent characteristic to who you are, and you deserve to receive protection on that basis.
Right. I've had cases in which for some countries, unfortunately, they're well known for being very homophobic. For instance, Jamaica, we've had clients in the past where they had to flee the country with the help of nonprofit organizations in this country because they're persecuted. They cannot get a job, so these people end up being homeless. And once they're homeless, they're just a target for violence.
Yes.
And unfortunately, that is the case in many South American countries and Latin American countries. But Mary, going back to you, do you think that a decision by the Supreme Court this summer is going to benefit some of that discrimination legislation locally? Is that going to have any effect at that level?
Well, it wouldn't have any direct legal effect.
Okay.
Hopefully it would have, a precedential effect, sending a message, a symbolic message that, all citizens of this country deserve to be treated equally and to have the same rights and benefits and protections. I think there's also the potential of the backlash reaction that I talked about as well.
Okay, but you don't think that necessarily if the Supreme were going to issue a decision supporting gay marriage, that is not going to help with the passage or the rejection of that legislation that is to some extent going forward with discrimination or implementing discriminatory rules? Do you think it's going to have an effect or not?
I wish I knew. On the one hand, I hope that it will have that positive effect of sending that message that we should all be treated the same. But again, we've already seen it happening around the country and other states. The folks who oppose equality are trying to find other ways to kind of push back against protections and rights for the LGBT community. So I hope that that doesn't happen, but I think there is the potential for that. And going back to Maria talking about issues of persecution and asylum, unfortunately, we still have to deal with that issue, here in the United States and here in Florida. Hate crimes in Florida, 22% of the hate crimes in Florida are against members of the LGBT community. Okay. That's second only to race, and proportionally, it's the largest targeted community and the most violent crimes. That also correlates to, bullying against LGBT individuals in our schools. So, discrimination is a big issue, but just, protection from violence and persecution, unfortunately, is still an issue that we need to deal with here in Florida.
Okay.
And on a local level, are there any types of protections against bullying in public schools on the basis of sexual identity orientation?
Right.
There's not on a statewide level. There is a statewide anti-bullying law, but it does not specifically name and identify sexual orientation or gender identity as a category. As we have done in many of these instances of human rights ordinances, there are some local communities that have done that have specifically included protections on that basis, but again, nothing on a statewide level.
Okay, so just to wrap up, what should somebody do once again if they think that they're being discriminated against when it comes to getting married, or if they have a relative who's being bullied at a school, a child, what should they do?
Well, they should contact a lawyer who specializes in those types of issues, who can address the specifics of that particular situation and hopefully resolve it, and if not resolve it, then take the necessary legal means to address it.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you both for taking the time to be here with us, be part of the show, and inform the community. It has been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Once again, Mary and Maria, thank you for participating in our show. The Conozca Sus Derechos show of the Hispanic Bar Association is dedicated to service and education of our community. We want to thank Orange TV for their assistance in bringing you this program. For further information, please visit hbacf.com. Thank you for tuning in.